It was a usual busy day in the sleek, modern office of a rapidly growing tech company. The air was thick with the energy of professionals hustling from meeting to meeting, typing away at their computers and discussing numbers that would shape the future. At the head of the company was the CEO, a man known for his sharp business sense and aggressive strategies. He had built the company from the ground up, rising to power with a no-nonsense attitude and the ability to spot an opportunity in any market. Among the young professionals working in the company was Maya, a contract negotiator with an exceptional knack for reading between the lines. Maya had joined the company not long ago, and in the short time she had been there, she had already made a name for herself. She was brilliant, unafraid of speaking up, and unlike many others, didn't seek to climb the corporate ladder by simply nodding along to whatever the higher-ups said. She had quickly proven herself invaluable, using her skills to identify potential issues in contracts that others would have missed. Today, Maya had been invited to a major meeting. She had been told that this meeting was crucial, with the company looking to sign an important contract with a major supplier that could potentially expand their reach into new international markets. The CEO would be presenting the contract to the team, and Maya had been asked to review the final draft beforehand to ensure that everything was in order. She knew this was her moment to shine, but she had no idea that it would also be the moment that would challenge her career in ways she couldn't yet predict. The conference room was grand, with a long glass table and comfortable chairs surrounding it. A large flat-screen monitor hung on the wall, displaying the logo of the company and a few details about the upcoming deal. Maya entered the room with her head held high, carrying her laptop with the final version of the contract open on the screen. The room quickly quieted as the CEO walked in, his confident stride filling the space. He was a tall man dressed in a crisp suit, with an aura of authority that commanded attention. The CEO smiled at the group, his eyes scanning over the faces of his colleagues, nodding in recognition as he took his seat at the head of the table. His sharp gaze briefly landed on Maya, and for a moment she felt the weight of his expectations. She had been tasked with looking over the contract, and now she had to ensure that it was flawless. "We're here to finalize a deal that could change the direction of this company," the CEO began, his deep voice carrying authority. "This contract could open up new markets for us, increase our revenue, and solidify our position as leaders in the tech industry." He looked around the table, waiting for a few nods of agreement. "Everyone's worked hard to get to this point. Let's make sure we don't overlook anything." Maya sat quietly as he presented the key terms of the deal, detailing the potential for expansion into new markets and the promises of increased sales and long-term partnerships. It was a deal that seemed to tick all the right boxes, at least on the surface. The CEO was confident, and the rest of the team appeared equally optimistic, nodding along as he highlighted the benefits. But Maya wasn't so sure. As the CEO continued speaking, Maya's eyes stayed fixed on the contract, her mind working quickly as she scanned through the terms. She had reviewed the contract several times, but now that it was being presented in front of the group, the details jumped out at her. Something didn't feel right. Her finger traced a particular clause that seemed harmless at first, but as she read it again, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. This clause, while giving the company the appearance of a solid partnership, actually included terms that would bind the company in ways that could be financially detrimental in the long run. It was a subtle, carefully worded clause that could allow the supplier to change the terms of the agreement in their favor after the deal was signed, with little recourse from the company. The more Maya thought about it, the more she realized that this was a trap, an opportunity for the supplier to take advantage of the company's growth without offering much in return. Her heart raced. This was a crucial moment, and she had to speak up. Maya wasn't the type to sit back and let things go unchecked, but she also knew the risk of challenging the CEO in front of the team. It wasn't an easy decision. The CEO was well liked by the team, and he was known for his no-nonsense attitude. He didn't tolerate disruptions, and his authority was rarely questioned, but the thought of the company making such a costly mistake made Maya's decision clear. She couldn't let this pass. She took a deep breath, cleared her throat, and raised her hand. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice steady but with an edge of authority. "But there's something I need to point out about the contract." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her, and for a split second Maya felt the weight of the attention on her. She could feel the CEO's eyes on her, a sharp look that seemed to question her decision to interrupt. The rest of the team remained silent, waiting for her to explain. The CEO gave her a brief nod, acknowledging her, but his face remained unreadable. "Go ahead, Maya," he said, his tone cool. Maya stood up, her mind racing as she opened the contract on her laptop and projected the specific clause on the screen. If you look at Clause 4, it states that the supplier can modify the terms of the agreement after the contract is signed, with no obligation to give us any notice or recourse. It essentially locks us into terms that could be highly disadvantageous if the market changes or if they decide to raise their prices. The room shifted as people leaned forward to look at the projected screen. The CEO's smile faltered slightly, and his expression shifted from confident to contemplative. Maya continued, explaining how the clause could cause significant financial strain if left unchecked, and how it could affect the company's ability to negotiate future deals. Her voice was calm but firm as she made her case. As Maya spoke, she noticed the CEO's brow furrow, and the smile that had been on his face earlier faded. She could see the change in his demeanor, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information she had just presented. The room was silent, and the tension in the air was palpable. The CEO sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face as he took a moment to think. The atmosphere had shifted from one of enthusiasm to one of uncertainty. "You're certain about this?" the CEO finally asked, his tone colder than before. Maya nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I'm sure. This clause is dangerous for the company. We could end up losing millions if we don't renegotiate the terms." The CEO didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the whiteboard, his back turned to the group as he processed the information. Maya could feel the weight of the moment, the uncertainty, the doubt, and the silent tension in the room. She had done what she felt was right, but now there was no turning back. The CEO's next move would determine the course of the deal, and possibly her future at the company. After a long pause, the CEO turned around, his face now serious. "We'll need to take another look at this. Maya, thank you for pointing this out," he said, his voice surprisingly neutral. "But let's move forward with some caution. We'll review the contract in more detail and come back to it later." The room seemed to exhale collectively, and the meeting slowly transitioned back to a more typical tone, but the CEO's expression remained guarded. As the meeting adjourned and people filed out of the room, Maya couldn't help but wonder what this would mean for her going forward. She had spoken up, but in doing so she had made an impression, one that might not be entirely positive. For now, all she could do was wait and see how the CEO would handle the situation and how it would affect her standing in the company. The following days after the meeting felt heavy for Maya. Though she had spoken up, the aftermath of her bold move left her uncertain. The CEO had acknowledged her concern about the contract, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. People were talking, and Maya could sense the whispers, even though no one said anything directly to her. Some admired her courage for standing up, while others were uncertain, unsure if she had crossed a line. Maya continued with her daily tasks, but the sense of unease never left her. She focused on the work at hand, attending meetings, reviewing contracts, and offering her expertise where needed. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that her relationship with the CEO had changed. The CEO had been coldly polite after the meeting. He didn't show any signs of anger or frustration, but his behavior had become more reserved. They hadn't had any direct conversation since then, but Maya couldn't ignore the subtle tension that lingered between them. There was a new formality in his tone whenever he addressed her. The warmth he had shown when she first joined the company had faded, replaced by a careful professionalism that made Maya feel as though she were walking on eggshells. One afternoon, as Maya was reviewing a set of legal documents in her office, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the CEO's assistant, asking her to come to the CEO's office at 3:30 p.m. sharp. Her stomach dropped. Maya had no idea what to expect, but her mind immediately started racing with possibilities. Had he reconsidered her comments about the contract? Was this the moment where he would tell her that her actions had been too bold, too disruptive? She stood up, straightening her desk and preparing herself mentally for whatever was about to come. At precisely 3:30 p.m., she knocked on the CEO's office door. "Come in," a familiar voice called from the other side. Maya opened the door and stepped inside. The CEO was sitting at his desk, the usual commanding presence in the room. But this time he wasn't smiling. Instead, he was looking at a file on his desk, frowning slightly. "Have a seat, Maya," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. Maya sat down, her hands folded neatly on her lap. She tried to maintain her composure, though inside, she couldn't help but feel a sense of nervousness. Was this going to be a reprimand? The CEO didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, his fingers tapping lightly on the file. It seemed as though he was deciding how to begin. "I've been reviewing the contract, Maya," he said after a few moments, "and you were right. There were issues with it that could have been detrimental to the company in the long run." Maya nodded, relieved to hear that he had taken her concerns seriously. "I'm glad we're on the same page," she said. "It was important that we addressed that clause before moving forward." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I've spoken with the team about it. Everyone agrees that you pointed out something critical that we had missed." He paused, then added, "But I still don't know how I feel about the way you handled it." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come, but it was still hard to hear. "I wasn't trying to undermine anyone," she said softly. "I just felt it was important to speak up. If I hadn't, we could have signed something that would have been damaging in the future." The CEO sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I understand that, Maya, and I do appreciate that you saved us from making a mistake. But challenging me in front of the whole team? It's not the kind of behavior I expect from someone at your level. I value teamwork and respect for decisions made in the room." Maya's mind was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "I wasn't trying to challenge you," she said. "I was just doing my job. If I hadn't spoken up, I wouldn't be doing it the right way." The CEO sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know you're trying to protect the company, Maya, I get that. But there's a way to handle these things without causing a scene." He looked at her, his eyes softening just a little. "You have a sharp eye, and you're good at what you do. I just want to make sure that you approach these situations in a way that doesn't put you at odds with the rest of the team, or me." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She understood what he was saying. He wasn't angry with her. He was more concerned about the impression her actions had left. She had been bold, but she had also disrupted the natural flow of things, making her seem as though she didn't trust the team's judgment. It was a fine line, and Maya had stepped right over it. "I'll do better next time," Maya said, offering a calm and sincere response. "I didn't mean to create tension. I just wanted to make sure we weren't signing something that could hurt the company." The CEO seemed to consider her words for a moment before nodding. "I know. I can see that you have the company's best interests at heart." He paused. "But going forward, I'd appreciate it if you handled things more discreetly. We need to keep things professional." Maya agreed, though she knew it wouldn't be easy. Speaking up in such a setting had felt like the right thing to do at the time. But now she realized that sometimes the right thing wasn't always the easiest way to handle things. There were politics and dynamics in play that she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she wanted to challenge the system. As she left the CEO's office, Maya felt a mix of emotions. There was a sense of pride in knowing that she had done her job well, but there was also a lingering discomfort. She had proven herself, but the price had been a shift in how the CEO viewed her. That evening, as Maya sat at her desk reviewing the new set of contracts she was tasked with, she found herself reflecting on the conversation. The CEO had acknowledged her expertise, but he had also set a clear boundary. She knew she would have to tread carefully from now on, making sure she didn't step on anyone's toes in her pursuit of doing what was right. But one thing was clear: Maya wasn't going to back down. She had made a difference, and she knew that no matter how the CEO felt about her approach, she had done what was necessary for the company. She could only hope that over time he would come to see her value in a new light, not just as someone who questioned authority, but as someone who could be trusted to navigate the complex world of contracts with integrity and skill. Some days following the meeting with the CEO seemed to pass slowly for Maya. While her confidence in her work remained strong, the uneasy feeling from that conversation lingered in her mind. She had always been someone who believed in doing things the right way, no matter the cost, but now she was beginning to understand the delicate balance that came with corporate life, the fine line between standing up for what was right and maintaining the harmony that was expected in a high-stakes environment like the one she worked in, though she had been told to handle situations more discreetly. Maya couldn't help but notice the difference in how people treated her now. The dynamic in the office had shifted, and it wasn't just because of the contract. There was a subtle but clear change in how the CEO's assistant interacted with her, and even some of her colleagues seemed to keep their distance. Her role in the company, once seen as a trusted advisor, now seemed clouded by the disruption she had caused in the meeting. She couldn't help but think about it every time she walked into the office. The whispers in the hallway, the hushed conversations that paused when she walked by. It was as if people were still processing her actions, unsure of whether to praise her for speaking up or criticize her for disrupting the flow of the company's processes. But Maya was determined not to let it get to her. She focused on the work as she always had and kept her head down. She kept pushing forward, not letting the new atmosphere affect her productivity. Still, her mind couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The CEO's coldness toward her seemed to be more than just a momentary reaction. It felt like something deeper, like a shift in the way he viewed her. Something she had to figure out if she was going to succeed in this environment. A few days later, Maya was working late in her office, reviewing another set of contracts for a different project when her phone buzzed again. It was another email from the CEO's assistant, asking her to join a meeting at 10 a.m. the following morning. This time there was no mention of what the meeting would be about. Maya's heart skipped a beat. The uncertainty of the past few days seemed to be building to something, and she couldn't help but wonder what the CEO wanted this time. The next morning, Maya arrived at the conference room a few minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. As she walked into the room, she saw the CEO sitting at the head of the table, his eyes focused on a set of documents in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his face unreadable. "Good morning, Maya," he said, his voice steady and formal. "Good morning," she replied, offering a polite smile before taking a seat. There were a few other people in the room, several of her colleagues, including the CFO and a few other senior managers. Maya didn't recognize the man sitting across from her, but he was dressed in a business suit, which immediately told her he was someone important. His presence added to the tension in the room. The meeting hadn't even started yet, but it felt like the calm before the storm. Once everyone had gathered, the CEO stood up, looking at the group with his usual commanding presence. "Maya, thank you for joining us," he began. "Today we're here to talk about something important. After reviewing the contract, I've realized that there are more details that need to be addressed before we proceed further with the deal." Maya's mind raced. Was he about to discuss the contract again? She wasn't sure if this was a positive or negative turn of events, but she remained calm, knowing that her job was to be prepared for whatever came next. "We've brought in an outside consultant to help with the final review," the CEO continued, gesturing toward the man sitting across from Maya. "This is Mr. Hunter. He's a legal expert who specializes in international contracts. We've asked him to take a look at the agreement, and he has some feedback." Maya nodded, taking a moment to look at Mr. Hunter, who gave her a polite but distant smile. He seemed professional, but there was something about his demeanor that made her feel uneasy. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it felt as if he wasn't entirely invested in the process. The CEO motioned for Mr. Hunter to begin, and the man cleared his throat before speaking. "I've gone over the contract in detail, and I have a few concerns," Mr. Hunter began. "There are a couple of clauses that need to be tightened up, particularly in terms of intellectual property and long-term liability. The clause that was highlighted last week regarding the supplier's ability to modify the terms is just one part of the issue." Maya felt a surge of relief. At least she wasn't the only one who had seen the red flags in the contract. She listened intently as Mr. Hunter continued, outlining the various areas where the agreement could expose the company to unnecessary risks. Maya's mind began to settle, feeling validated in her earlier assessment. But then Mr. Hunter paused and turned his gaze toward Maya, as if sizing her up. "I've heard from a few people that you were the one who pointed out the clause regarding the supplier's ability to change the terms," he said, his tone slightly condescending. "It's good that you caught that, but I must say, I don't think your approach was the most professional." Maya's stomach sank. The shift in his tone caught her off guard, and she could feel the eyes of the room turning toward her. She hadn't expected this kind of critique, especially after the CEO had acknowledged her input. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that Mr. Hunter was likely a direct reflection of the CEO's thinking. If the CEO had allowed him to speak in this way, it meant that he was not fully on her side. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice steady but firm. "Could you clarify what you mean by professional? I've always believed that the company's best interests come first, and I pointed out a major flaw that could have cost us significantly in the future." Mr. Hunter raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. The CEO's eyes shifted briefly between the two of them, his expression still unreadable. "I just think," Mr. Hunter continued, "that there's a way to raise concerns without causing such a disruption. It's important to be mindful of how you present issues, especially in front of others. There are ways to handle these matters privately." Maya's frustration started to rise, but she kept her composure. She had already been through this with the CEO. She understood that what Mr. Hunter was saying had less to do with the contract and more to do with his perception of her behavior. "Perhaps," she said, carefully choosing her words. "But if I had waited for a more private moment, we could have signed that contract without realizing the problem. I can't compromise when it comes to the company's future." The CEO finally spoke, his voice cold but calm. "Maya, I appreciate your passion, but I think we need to move forward and work together more effectively." He looked at Mr. Hunter. "I think it's best that we leave the contract review to Mr. Hunter from here on out." Maya nodded, her heart sinking as the weight of his words hit her. She could feel the room closing in around her. The validation she had hoped for was quickly fading, replaced by the sense that she had made a mistake by speaking up once again. Maya sat in her office, staring at the email in front of her. The message from the CEO's assistant was brief, inviting her to a meeting later that day to discuss the final review of the contract. There was no mention of what the CEO wanted to discuss, and that made Maya feel uneasy. She hadn't spoken to the CEO directly since the meeting, and the coldness between them had only grown since then. She couldn't shake the feeling that her earlier actions had caused a rift, and now she was unsure of where she stood in the company. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her close colleague, Nina, who had been one of the few people in the office who had supported her during the earlier contract meeting. Nina had sensed the tension between Maya and the CEO, and had even mentioned a few times that she was worried Maya was being too hard on herself. But now Maya wasn't sure who she could trust. The message read, "Hey, just heard from HR, they're making some changes in the team structure. Don't know much yet, but you might want to keep your eyes peeled." Maya frowned at the message. HR changes were never a good sign. The last time there were significant changes to the team structure, it had meant layoffs. Maya couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and the idea of being pushed out because of a misunderstanding with the CEO was something she couldn't bear to think about. She sighed and closed the email with the meeting invitation, gathering her thoughts before the meeting later that afternoon. She tried to shake off the negative thoughts, but they kept creeping in. Had she made a mistake? Had she ruined her chances at progressing within the company? All these questions swirled in her mind as she went about her tasks, trying to focus on the work at hand. When the time for the meeting finally came, Maya walked toward the conference room, her heart pounding with anxiety. She had taken the time to review the contract once again, looking for any other issues she could point out to strengthen her case. She had to be prepared. She knew that. As she entered the room, the atmosphere felt different. The usual sterile environment of the conference room now felt more tense, almost as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. The CEO was sitting at the head of the table, his face expressionless as always. A few other colleagues were present, including Mr. Hunter, the consultant who had been brought in for the contract review. "Come in, Maya," the CEO said, gesturing to the empty seat next to Mr. Hunter. Maya nodded, her heart racing, and made her way to her seat. She was acutely aware of the weight of everyone's gaze as she sat down. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, as if everyone was waiting for her to speak. The silence felt suffocating, and Maya couldn't help but wonder if the CEO had discussed her behavior with the others before the meeting. The thought made her feel exposed, as if her actions had already been judged and found wanting. "We're here to finalize the review of the contract," the CEO began, his voice calm, but there was something in his tone that Maya couldn't quite place. "Mr. Hunter, I trust you've addressed the concerns from our last discussion." Mr. Hunter nodded, a tight smile on his face. Yes, we've gone through everything. The necessary revisions have been made, and I believe the contract is now in its final form. However, I do have some points I'd like to go over with the team to ensure everything is airtight before we proceed. Maya stayed quiet, her mind racing. She felt the weight of the conversation shifting toward her, and her instincts told her this wasn't just about the contract anymore. The tension in the room felt palpable, and she couldn't ignore the underlying discomfort that hung in the air. As the meeting continued, Mr. Hunter went through the revised clauses, explaining the changes and why they were necessary. Maya listened intently, focusing on every word. Her mind was sharp as always, but it wasn't just the contract that she was concerned about anymore. She was starting to feel like she was being scrutinized, like she was under a microscope, and it was becoming harder to separate her thoughts from the undercurrent of anxiety that was building within her. Finally, after a few minutes, the CEO spoke again. "Maya, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the revisions," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "You've been so thorough with the previous review, I'm sure you have some feedback on the changes." Maya hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. "I've reviewed the revisions and I agree with the changes Mr. Hunter has proposed," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The contract looks much stronger now, and I believe we've addressed the key risks." The CEO nodded but didn't seem entirely satisfied. There was something in his expression that made Maya uneasy. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was an underlying tension between them that she couldn't ignore. "Good," the CEO said, his tone clipped. "I'm glad we're in agreement. Let's move forward with finalizing this." As the meeting came to a close, Maya felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The discussion had gone smoothly and there had been no major issues with the contract. But the tension that lingered in the room made her wonder if this was the end of the road for her at the company. She had spoken up, done her job well, and saved the company from a costly mistake. But now it felt like there was no going back. She stood up, ready to leave the room when the CEO called out to her. "Maya, could you stay for a moment?" he asked. His voice was softer than before, but it still held a level of formality that made Maya's stomach twist. She nodded and waited as the rest of the team filed out of the room. When they were finally alone, the CEO looked at her with a more serious expression. "I appreciate your efforts, Maya," he said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "You've done well to point out the flaws in the contract, and I see your value. But I want to make sure you understand the bigger picture." Maya nodded, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean, sir?" The CEO took a deep breath as if he were choosing his words carefully. "What I'm trying to say is that while your work is valuable, how you present yourself is just as important. We can't have someone constantly challenging decisions in front of the team. You need to understand that the balance between speaking up and maintaining professionalism is crucial here." Maya felt her heart sink. The words she had feared hearing were finally being spoken. She had pushed too hard, too fast, and now she was being asked to reconsider how she approached situations. "I understand," Maya replied softly, though inside she felt conflicted. She had done what she thought was right, but now she was being told it wasn't enough. She was being asked to conform to the expectations of the company, even if it meant sacrificing a part of herself in the process. "I'm glad we're on the same page," the CEO said, his expression softening slightly. "You have potential, Maya, but remember there's always more than one way to handle a situation." With that, he stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Maya left the room, her mind in turmoil. The message had been clear, her actions had been noticed, but they hadn't been appreciated in the way she had hoped. She had done the right thing, but it had come at a cost. As she walked back to her office, Maya couldn't help but wonder if she had sacrificed her integrity for the sake of fitting in. And if that was the case, was it worth it? The days that followed the CEO's conversation with Maya felt like a blur. Her mind was clouded with thoughts of what had transpired in that meeting. The way the CEO had explained the importance of balancing professional behavior with speaking up felt like a lecture. Maya knew she had done what was right for the company, but now it seemed like she was being told to silence herself in the name of maintaining company harmony. The whole situation felt suffocating. As she sat at her desk reviewing new contracts, Maya's thoughts kept drifting back to that conversation. She had always prided herself on speaking the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. But now, she was being told that her truth didn't matter unless it was presented in the right way. The feeling of being boxed in, unable to express her thoughts freely, began to gnaw at her. That evening, as she sat alone in her office, Maya received a call. It was Nina, her colleague, who had been one of the few people to understand what Maya was going through. "Hey, I heard what happened," Nina said, her voice sympathetic. "Are you okay?" Maya let out a long sigh. "I don't know. It's like everything I did to help them is now being questioned. I pointed out the flaws in that contract to save the company, but it feels like I've made myself a target." Nina was quiet for a moment before responding. "Look, Maya, I get it. It's hard when you do the right thing and still get pushed aside. But remember, you're valuable. You've always been the one to speak up when things aren't right. Just don't lose yourself in all this corporate nonsense." Maya appreciated Nina's words, but they didn't completely ease the storm brewing inside her. The truth was, she felt torn. She had always believed in doing what was right, but now she wondered if the cost of standing up was too high. Was she supposed to compromise her values to fit into the corporate mold? Was she being too stubborn? That night, as she sat on the couch at home, Maya couldn't help but think about the bigger picture. She had always been driven by a desire to succeed, but she also wanted to make a real difference. What was the point of success if it meant losing who she was in the process? She thought about the countless hours she had spent working, the sleepless nights spent reviewing contracts, and the pride she had always taken in doing her job well. But now, the thrill of her work had dulled. She felt like an outsider in a place that was supposed to be her career home. The next day at the office, Maya tried to shake off the doubts that had been weighing her down. She walked into the building, with determination, knowing that she had to focus on her work and not let the company's politics consume her. But the minute she stepped into the office, the atmosphere felt different. It was subtle, but she could feel it. The coldness in the air, the lack of eye contact from her colleagues. Everything felt a little off. She had barely settled into her desk when her phone rang. It was the CEO's assistant asking if Maya could come to the CEO's office for a meeting. Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. Was this about the contract? Was she being reprimanded for speaking out of turn? With a deep breath, Maya made her way to the CEO's office. As she entered, she was greeted by the CEO's assistant, who gestured for her to take a seat. "Thank you for coming, Maya," the CEO said as he sat behind his desk. His expression was neutral, but there was something about his posture that made Maya feel uneasy. He had called her in without warning, and the tension in the room made her wonder what he wanted. "I'll get straight to the point," the CEO said, his voice firm but not unkind. "After our last meeting, I've been thinking about the direction we're going with this project. I've come to realize that I may have been too hasty in my judgment about how you handled the contract review. You have a valuable perspective, Maya, and I can't deny that." Maya blinked, surprised by the CEO's words. She had expected more, of a reprimand, but here he was acknowledging her contribution. It felt like a small victory, but at the same time it didn't completely erase the doubts that had been festering in her mind. "I know you've been under a lot of pressure, and I appreciate the work you've done," the CEO continued. "But moving forward, we need to ensure that our team works together without disruptions. We can't afford to have personal differences cloud the bigger picture. I trust that you understand that." Maya nodded, but inside she was conflicted. She understood what the CEO was saying, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more about conforming than collaborating. The idea of silencing her voice in favor of corporate unity didn't sit well with her. "I understand," she said quietly, her mind racing. "I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're doing what's best for the company." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying her. "I know you do, Maya. That's why I'm asking you to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. It's not just about your individual input. It's about finding a way to work together as a team. I'm asking you to trust me on this." Maya felt a sense of unease settle over her. It wasn't that she didn't trust the CEO, but there was something about his words that felt like a subtle warning. Was she being asked to stay in her lane, to stop questioning the decisions of those in power? Was this the price of success in the corporate world? "I'll do my best," Maya said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. The CEO nodded, his expression softening. I know you will. You're a valuable member of this team, Maya. I just want to make sure we're all working toward the same goal. With that, the meeting ended. As Maya left the CEO's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had done what was expected of her. She had spoken up, pointed out the flaws in the contract, and made sure the company was protected from potential risk. But now, it seemed like she was being asked to conform, to keep her thoughts to herself, and work quietly in the background. The feeling of being caught in a web of corporate expectations left her feeling trapped. She didn't want to lose herself in the process, but at the same time, she knew that the stakes were high. Her career, her future, everything seemed to be hanging in the balance. As she walked back to her desk, Maya made a decision. She couldn't continue like this, torn between doing what was right and fitting into a mold that didn't allow her to fully express herself. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let her voice be stifled. But what was the right choice? Was she willing to risk everything for the sake of her principles? The days following her meeting with the CEO felt like they were dragging on endlessly. Maya's mind was still caught in the tension between what she knew was right and what she had been asked to accept. She had always believed that her voice, her opinions, were what made her valuable. Now it felt like that very voice was being stifled by the company she had worked so hard for. At home, Maya tried to clear her head. She sat by the window in her living room, staring out at the city below, her thoughts tangled with doubt. She had always wanted to make a real impact, to use her position to change things for the better. But now it seemed like the very things that made her unique, her ability to think critically, to speak up, were becoming liabilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that her career was at a crossroads. The next morning, Maya arrived at the office early, hoping to get a head start on the day's work. She knew she had to keep her focus on the tasks at hand. But as she sat at her desk, reviewing the latest project details, her thoughts kept drifting back to the CEO's words. He had acknowledged her work, but at the same time, he had warned her about being too outspoken, about disrupting the team dynamic. It left her wondering if there was a way to find balance between speaking up and fitting in. Around mid-morning, Maya was summoned to another meeting, this time with the head of HR. Her stomach twisted in knots as she walked to the HR department. What was this about? Had something gone wrong with the contract review? Or was this related to the feedback she had received from the CEO? When she entered the HR office, she was greeted with a warm smile from the HR manager. But Maya could sense that the woman's expression was somewhat strained, as if she were walking on eggshells. Maya, thank you for coming, the HR manager began, her tone polite but cautious. I wanted to have a quick discussion with you about some feedback we've received. It's nothing bad, but I do think it's important to address. Maya felt her heart race. What kind of feedback? Well, the HR manager continued, the team has been discussing the recent contract review, and while everyone agrees that your input was valuable, there's a concern about how you've been presenting your thoughts during meetings. There's been some feedback that suggests you might be coming across as too aggressive in your approach. We value your contributions, but it's important to maintain a positive team dynamic. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the first time she had heard something like this. But hearing it from HR, the very department responsible for managing employee relations, made it feel like a more formal reprimand. The words "too aggressive" echoed in her mind, making her question everything she had done in the past few days. Had she really overstepped? Had she been too vocal in her pursuit of what was right? I see, Maya said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. I've always believed that it's important to be honest and open about issues. I never intended to upset anyone, but I do feel that the company's interest should always come first. The HR manager nodded, acknowledging Maya's point. Of course, Maya, we know your intentions are good, but sometimes it's about how we say things and how we present ourselves. We all want to work toward the same goal, but we need to do so in a way that fosters collaboration rather than creating friction. Maya felt her frustration rising. She had never intended to create friction. She had simply wanted to ensure that the company was making the right decisions. But now it seemed like she was being asked to quiet herself for the sake of peace. It was the same message she had received from the CEO, and it felt like a constant reminder that she had to choose between speaking up and fitting in. "I understand," Maya replied, though she wasn't sure if she truly did. "I'll do my best to adjust my approach moving forward." The HR manager gave her a reassuring smile. "We appreciate that, Maya. We value your work and we want to make sure you continue to thrive here." As Maya left the HR office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat. She had tried so hard to be a voice for change, for accountability, but now it felt like she was being told to fall in line with the corporate culture, no matter how uncomfortable it made her. She had to admit, it was starting to feel like the very things that made her unique were being tamped down, and it left her questioning whether it was all worth it. Over the next few weeks, Maya focused on her work, trying to find the balance between maintaining her integrity and fitting in with the company's expectations. She spent long hours at her desk, refining contracts, reviewing financial reports, and making sure everything was in order. But no matter how hard she tried, the nagging feeling that she was losing herself in the process remained. One afternoon, as she was preparing to leave for the day, she was approached by a colleague named Carlos, who had been working in the legal department for several years. Carlos had always been one of the few people Maya felt she could talk to openly, and she appreciated his straightforwardness. "Maya, can I talk to you for a minute?" Carlos asked, his voice low. "Of course," Maya replied, wondering what this was about. "I just wanted to check in with you," Carlos began. "I've noticed you've been a bit quieter lately. You okay?" Maya hesitated before responding. She hadn't realized how much her mood had shifted in the past few weeks. It was as if she had been swallowed up by the expectations of the company, trying to please everyone while suppressing her own voice. The weight of it was starting to wear on her. "I don't know, Carlos," Maya said, her voice betraying her frustration. "I've been doing my best to fit in, but I feel like I'm losing myself in the process. The feedback I've been getting, it's like I'm being told that I'm too much. Too outspoken, too direct. It's like I have to compromise who I am to keep my job." Carlos gave her a sympathetic look. "I hear you. I've seen it happen to a lot of people here. They get so caught up in trying to fit the mold that they forget who they really are. But Maya, don't lose yourself in this. You have value because of who you are, not in spite of it. Don't let them make you feel like you have to change to succeed." Maya looked at him, surprised by his words. She had been so focused on the idea of fitting in, of conforming to the expectations set by the company, that she hadn't stopped to think about why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about success or fitting into a corporate structure. It was about making a difference, about using her position to bring about change. That had always been her goal. "Thanks, Carlos," Maya said, her voice quieter now but with a newfound sense of clarity. "You're right. I can't lose sight of why I'm here." As she left the office that evening, Maya felt a shift inside her. The doubt that had clouded her mind was starting to clear. She wasn't going to change who she was just to please others. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she couldn't let anyone take that away from her. Maya knew that the road ahead would be difficult. She would have to navigate the delicate balance between speaking her truth and maintaining her professionalism, but she was determined to find a way to do both. Her voice, her authenticity were her strengths, and she wasn't going to let them be silenced by anyone. With each step, Maya felt more certain that the future was hers to shape. And as long as she stayed true to herself, she knew she would find a way to succeed on her own terms.